It is easy to forget, or never to have known, that most people in the United States, most Americans, live in towns very much like this one in central Iowa. In fact, it's called State Center, though the folks here admit good-naturedly that the actual geographical center of Iowa is somewhere west of the town. Like many towns across this country, State Center was born because of the railroad. But now this community of 1,200 people exists to serve the farms that surround it and that extend to its very edge. There's just enough of everything here: 6 churches, 3 taverns, 2 grain elevators, 1 library, 3 doctors. And right on Main Street, Watson's Grocery Store, proprietors Ralph and Florence Watson. He's 86, she's 73. And if their store is an anachronism, it's an altogether pleasant one. Tell me about the politics of this town.
Well, it used to be pretty much Republican years ago, but she's gradually gone the other way. It isn't so much anymore.
It is. It's an older folks' town. The more of the older people that are here now. It didn't used to be, of course. Just gradually grown like that in a number of years.
Such was the setting for the curious exercise called Precinct Caucus Night. First, the Democrats performing a kind of political square dance, do-si-do. Carter people on one side of the room, Kennedy people on the other. When the dust settled, it was 34 for Carter, 20 for Kennedy, a ratio not unlike the statewide returns. Half a dozen people who had wanted to remain uncommitted were persuaded to join the Carter camp.
I could not support Kennedy. Just not in favor of them at all.
How about you, man?
I feel the same way.
Tell me why?
Chappaquiddick's the main thing. And I just in general don't support his policies.
While her husband organized one group, a woman who, with him, runs the local paper, offered this analysis of the vote.
I think it shows the dissatisfaction with Carter and the job he's done, because approximately 12 of the 20 Kennedy people are directly either farmers or grain elevator operators. They own farmland that they rent out, and that's a pretty telling factor when you can see who they are and who they're going to vote for.
Others agreed that the senator's vote was as much anti-Carter as pro-Kennedy. Downstairs, the Republicans, in a larger group, were to express their preference.
Reagan.
Bush.
Bush.
Reagan.
Say, I think Bush is going.
In this strong Ronald Reagan territory, the results, as phoned to state headquarters, were not good for the former California governor.
All right, Ronald Reagan, 39. George Bush, 28. Howard Baker, 23. Phil Crane, 2. Bob Dole, 2. John Conley, 1. Anderson, 0.
So they had done it here in State Center as they had done it all across Iowa. It probably would have an effect greater than even they had thought, because so many had participated. And yet it had remained throughout, decent and disorganized and responsible and fun and even a bit wacky. From State Center, Iowa, this is Joe Day.
I think most people who've ever been in a hobby store or an art store see kits make a stained glass lamp or whatever. What's the difference between that and what you're doing in this class?
These kits don't tell you how hard it is. It may be all pre-cut, but they don't say anything about soldering, and that takes a lot of practice and a lot of time. I would stay totally away from it. I think it's very hard. You have to build up technique as you're working, and to just start out and think you're going to make a really large lamp or window I don't think it's possible.
Cooper, a rural Iowa town. Population 50. It's like thousands of others spread across Iowa's 99 counties. Oh, but there's one exception. Cooper and its birthday hoopla managed to get the nation, through the eyes of the media, to take a look at the virtues and fun in American small-town living.
Hello, I'm Morgan Halbrin. Welcome to our final edition of Take One for 1981. The craft of working with stained glass has its roots in the medieval guilds of Europe. Once restricted to churches and religious shrines, it's now found in everything from pinball parlors to bird feeders. And recently we received a letter from Bonnie Long of State Center, Iowa, telling us about a young high school teacher who's keeping the art of stained glass alive and well in Iowa. Producer Jeff Ames traveled to State Center for a 20th century look at this ancient craft.
Stained glass. They are mosaics of color that change ordinary light into rainbows. The craft of making stained glass dates back to before the 12th century, when it began to appear in churches throughout Western Europe and parts of the Middle East. Today, it can be found throughout the world, and it has developed from simply an adornment for churches into an accepted art form, much like painting or sculpture. Nevertheless, it was surprising to learn that here, at West Marshall High School in State Center, Iowa, classes in stained glass are an accepted part of the curriculum. In fact, this is the only school in the entire state which offers classes in stained glass for credit.
Now this will happen, Matt, I'll have to help you cut that. The rest you could do.
The man responsible is Gary Wauters. Since he first began teaching stained glass at West Marshall, his classes, like the one we visited, have been full. So full that most students must be put on a waiting list.
I took an adult ed class in Marshalltown at the Art Center. This was about 4 years ago. And picked it up pretty much on my own. From then, after this first 6 weeks, started working on it, and once you're hooked, you're hooked.
Had you had an interest in it before you took the class there? Had you seen some and been intrigued?
Saw a lot of it, didn't know how it was done, and I've always kind of wanted to know how to do it. Just this class happened to come along, and I grabbed the chance.
What grades do you teach here? What grades are working in stained glass?
The stained glass classes are mostly juniors and seniors, the top 2 grades.
Explain the process to me. Carry me through what it would be like from, in this case, of a classroom setting, what it's like from the first time they walk in and what they're doing until the end of the term.
Until the end. They start out very simple, using all just straight line cuts, no curves or anything, and something very small, very basic. And by the end of the year, they're doing lampshades and large windows and 3-dimensional things. It gets very complicated.
So what you're saying is they do more than one project per...
Yes, for sure. They do a minimum of 5 throughout a semester.
Where do they get the ideas? Where do the patterns come from? I noticed today when we were walking around, that they're working from some established patterns. Where do those come from?
I've got a lot of different magazines and pattern books. You can get them in most glass stores or craft shops. They work a lot from there. A lot of it is on their own, so it isn't all pattern work.
Could a student, if he wanted to, come in with his own pattern and try to reproduce that?
Definitely.
Do some do that?
Yes, a lot of them do.
Actually, go through what happens in the course of making a piece of stained glass or a window or a lampshade.
Okay. There's 2 types of work in stained glass. One is using channeling, which I don't do. The other, as you saw today, they're working with copper foil, and after you've cut the glass pieces, you wrap this in copper foil. The solder will stick to that and stick the 2 pieces of glass together then.
How are the costs covered? Obviously the materials aren't cheap.
The glass and the foil, solder, and so on, the students pay for themselves. So by the end of the semester, they've invested quite a bit of money in it. In equipment like soldering irons and glass cutters, the school has been very good about paying that.
How much would you estimate that a student on the average would spend over the course of a term on glass and materials?
An average would be $50 easily. But as I mentioned before, it can go up to $75 or $100 per project, depending on how big they work, how complex.
Why do you suppose other schools don't have classes in stained glass? Is it because it's an old-fashioned craft?
I think basically the instructors don't know how to do it. And I was lucky enough to find this and work from there, but I would bet that's probably the #1 reason. We need more room.
The only thing I haven't, got cut.
Are those two?
E1 and E.
Okay, so you're ready to do. Is this going to be this way?
Yeah.
You're going to have the opening in the center. Okay. There's 6. Okay, the easiest way to do that is to do those. Let's get rid of all of this. Keep these. All of these are clear.
Yeah.
Okay.
Make it all my clear ones out then.
Just those and put these away, yeah.
Okay.
I think most people who've ever been in a hobby store or an art store see kits make a stained glass lamp or whatever. What's the difference between that and what you're doing in this class?
These kits don't tell you how hard it is. It may be all pre-cut, but they don't say anything about soldering, and that takes a lot of practice and a lot of time. I would stay totally away from it. I think it's very hard. You have to build up technique as you're working, and to just start out and think you're going to make a really large lamp or window I don't think it's possible.
What takes the most time?
Soldering, I think. That's probably the most tedious work of it. The challenge is in the cutting and fitting everything together. The soldering is just you're spending hours doing the same thing over and over. That gets very long.
As we spent the afternoon with Gary and his class, we were impressed by 2 things: the diversity and complexity of the projects underway here, and the seemingly total concentration exhibited by the students. Most of them appeared to be unaware of the presence of our camera. Are the students fairly ambitious in what they attempt?
Yes, and you have to slow that down at first. They'll try to do something that's very difficult and they don't have the background for it. So you hold them back at first, and after the 3rd or 4th project, they can pretty much do what they want.
2 students in here today stood out that I noticed. One of them was a young man who was making a box, which I think he probably wanted to put a little hinged door on the side.
Right.
Is that considered fairly difficult?
Yes. Anytime you work with hinges, it's a lot of work.
And the other person was a girl who was working on it wasn't an octagon, it was a spherical in shape. And that seemed like it would be extremely difficult just because the obvious, when you get to the end, what if one side doesn't quite fit?
Yeah, you've got a little room for error. That's difficult to do. She'll find that out when she starts soldering it and it's standing up. But that is difficult.
Once Gary's teaching duties are out of the way, he usually spends the afternoon working on his own projects. His work ranges from delicate boxes and terrariums to large framed window hangings, and has been displayed throughout the State Center area. Let's talk a little bit about the work you do in stained glass and the process that's involved. First of all, you start out with a basic pattern.
Right. Drawn out, and I usually use mat board around the outer edges just to limit the area you're working in. If you don't do this, you end up with a window that isn't square or bulges out in the center. So you limit yourself immediately with the drawing.
Okay. Now, the colors have been just determined ahead of time from the picture or whatever pattern you're coming from.
Right.
Do you ever vary that at all if you find that you like a variation on that?
Oh, you do that all the time. You're constantly changing what you had in mind in the first place. As you're working, you'll think something would work better. You change that all the time.
Okay, now once the pieces are cut, that's a fairly primitive process in that the edges are rough and stuff. How do you make sure that everything is going to fit just right?
You just practice a lot. There's no room for error. You get it as close as you can, and it takes practice. It's a big thing on it.
And besides just cutting with a glass cutter, then do you file and sand? Or
you can, but I rarely do. It chips the glass. It really doesn't look as nice. So it's best if you can do it right the first time and be done with it.
Okay, so what happens once you've got all the pieces of glass cut and they're all laid out and they all fit the way you want them to?
Okay, as you cut them, you wrap them with copper foil, and you do that as you're working. If you cut everything out and put it down and then go to foil it, you'll find out you run out of room. The foil takes up enough space that it makes it tight. So as you do it, you foil, you get everything put together, and then you get ready to start soldering.
And the soldering is basically just that, and that is laying down solder onto the copper.
Right. It'll stick only to the copper. If it gets on the glass, it'll just wipe off later. You flux it first, and then just solder along your lines.
So you're really not soldering the pieces of glass literally together. You're soldering the pieces of
a foil
together.
Right.
Okay. What happens, and it must certainly happen, maybe not, what happens if you get all done and look at it and something is wrong? Can you selectively take out a piece and replace it, or do you have to take the whole thing apart?
You can take out a piece, but it's a lot of work. You end up removing all the solder, you take a hammer and smash the glass and replace it, but it is very hard to do. It's very disgusting, is what it is.
Years ago, stained glass was something that you found in many houses.
Right.
And you don't see much of it anymore. Is it something that you ever think will come back?
I think it is back. I think it's been coming back for the last 5 or 6 years. You're starting to see more of it in new homes, too. It isn't just in the old homes anymore. New homes are designed with windows now. So I think it's an art that's coming back really strong right now.
Do you enjoy doing this? Do you enjoy working with the students and doing stained glass?
Yes, I do. Very much.
Why?
Oh, it's something that I'm very interested in. And I enjoy working with the students. I think by the end of the year, they end up enjoying it as much.
What do you hope students will come away with from one of your classes?
I hope that they have all the technical background needed to do anything they really want to work with it, whether that be windows or lampshades, anything. So I want them to have a well-rounded background in this.
Is there a place in the real world, I use that in quotes, for somebody who works in stained glass? Is it strictly aesthetic, or is there actually a functional use for it?
Oh, if you mean a commercial use for it, yes. There's, again, not in rural Iowa. You should be in an area where there's a lot of people to buy, but yes, there really is a big need for it.
What do you think you'll be doing in 10 years?
I may very well be sitting right here still teaching in State Center.
And doing stained glass?
Oh, definitely. No question of that.
Although we couldn't show every one of them, the projects the students were working on were striking in their beauty and complexity. We hope Gary continues to teach this craft for many, many years, and our thanks to Bonnie Long for her letter. If you have a comment, suggestion, or story idea, send it to us here at Take One, Post Office Box 1758, Des Moines, Iowa 50306. That's Take One, Post Office Box 17.
I may bring you the following special program. News Center 13. President Reagan's visit to Iowa.
Hello, I'm T.J. Beer. Welcome back. Just a review for you. President Ronald Reagan presented a speech to the Iowa Corn Growers Association. We're now going live to the D Farm, where Christy Callahan will be talking with us.
Jay, one of the helicopters just landed. We can hear the other one in the sky right now, and we are told that the president is in the third helicopter. The press, 40 farmers, and many, many Secret Service agents have been waiting for some hours now for the president to arrive. And we do have a farmer with us. We have several farmers with us to give some reaction and some of their thoughts on what they're going to talk to the president about. We have indications now that there is going to be a question and answer session, and our first farmer is Ron Jaycees from State Center. Ron, could you tell us what you are going to talk to the president about? What are the major concerns for you?
Well, I think the major concerns for us today is the profitability of our operations, and we have to look seriously at that. Some of us are hard-strapped, although we're putting food on the table for our families, and we're willing to make sacrifices and go the extra mile if we have to. And we think the program that the president has is absolutely meaningful, and I'm willing to go along with him with sacrifice and just do whatever I can to get the whole farm economy straightened out.
Thank you very much, Ron. And John, very briefly, we can see the presidential helicopter almost landing right now, but very briefly, could you tell us your thoughts?
Well, my main concern right now is the price of interest rates, and they are showing some improvement, which I'm grateful for. And I feel if it gets down somewhere around 12% that we can live with it.
Thank you very much. We are going to have to wind it up. The presidential helicopter is landing just on the other side of the farm, and right now we'll go to that live coverage. Thank you.
looking at the back sides of many television cameras, and we may not see the president right off the bat. Let me say very briefly that the farm that we're about ready to visit via live television is the D Brothers farm. Actually, 3 families that run this: Donald and Nellie, Eric and Jane, and Alan and Shirley. It is, of course, near State Center. There has been all kind of preparation going into this. Technicians have strung phone wires, including a hotline to the White House. This weekend, I understand, military helicopters were practicing landings and takeoffs there at the site. Jim West, who's a staffer for U.S. Senator Roger Jeffson, he's also apparently a neighbor to the D's, has been at the farm, and he reports that there's been a lot of hubbub and families even using portable radios to communicate. Now, by the way, as frequently happens in an event like this, roads have been sealed off in all directions, and I understand that they have been sealed up to a mile away. George, describe what you think about this kind of family operation. Is this a typical Iowa farm, do you think, that President Reagan is visiting?
It's not typical. It's super typical, shall we say, because after all, it is 600 acres, which is almost double the size of the average Iowa farm. They raise 2,500 hogs. Well, the average Iowa farm doesn't produce anything like that. And they sell a lot of these hogs as breeding stock all over the world. Their principal markets are in the United States, but some of their Yorkshires are in Japan, the Philippines, in Europe, other places, Brazil.
Well, of course, the D Brothers then would have a great deal of interest in what President Reagan has to say about exports.
That's for sure. But, of course, they have these Yorkshire animals, which they have done a lot of scientific work with, as I understand, and have a pretty good clientele. And they said that they haven't been making money on hogs at all, but they're going to make money this year due to the low price of corn and the high price of hogs, but they still want the price of corn to go up because they said high corn means good profits for the farmer.
Might talk a little bit about the D family preparation as we watch the helicopter come in. I understand that the State Center Fire Department has a water hydrant, sort of a portable water hydrant, if you will, because if anybody has ever been around helicopters, you know what a dust storm they can raise coming in. So they have hoses and what have you to land there on the D family front lawn and to kind of hose it down so that you won't have a dust storm in your eyes.
They said among the preparations the Secret Service insisted upon was dust-proofing the road. And anybody who drives gravel roads knows how dusty they can be in sticky, hot weather like this.
Speaking of sticky and hot weather, I was listening to some reports that Eric and Alan had to fix the air conditioning in the farrowing barn this morning. Can you imagine, in this day of apparent temperatures of 105 to 110 degrees, now that's with humidity. I don't want anybody to think that it's 105 degrees out, but combined with humidity, animals can get very sick in a farrowing house, which would, of course, be like a tin building. If it's...
That is a large farrowing house, and they have these Yorkshire sows in there. And they also, this is also the home of their pet, an 800-pound boar.
Such a pet. I don't know. You'd take it.
You would think that they would go broke feeding it, but they hold the animal to 3 pounds of feed a day because they know he'd be 1,500 pounds if he ate all he wanted. But they've had it for 2.5 years. And apparently they're just going to keep it. Now, that's something for a farmer to be feeding the hog, not for profit.
I'm sure that a pet like that not only takes a lot of money and what have you, but a lot of attention to an 800-pound boar is one that I don't think I'd argue with. I understand we do now see the presidential helicopter landing. We have no reports yet on exactly who is riding with the president, but I'm sure we will see shortly. What a day for the D family.
It certainly is. The D family having a president on their farm, that is a tremendous honor. But just imagine Woody Deal down here in Warren County had 2 presidents.
Yes.
He had Lyndon Johnson as president and also Jimmy Carter.
But unlike the family near Indianola, the D family is not particularly politically active.
That's right.
Woody Deal, as a Democrat, had been an activist in the 1976 presidential caucuses. And the D family, I think to this day, is
Probably a well-concealed mystery why they were chosen.
Well, I think they just wanted to get a good Iowa farm, and they certainly picked a good one. And these people, as you might guess, voted for Reagan and are for Reagan.
Now, this is the 3rd Congressional District,
That's
so
right.
we might expect Mr. Cooper Evans to be with the president on this particular helicopter. There he is. A day to take off your coat, I do believe. Greetings,
And there
family. We can't hear yet over our own audio what the gentlemen are saying, but can you project what they might be talking about?
Well, they're certainly, see, the brothers are on each side of the president, the D brothers. And I would imagine that they're probably taken to that farrowing house, don't you imagine?
I wonder if President Reagan remembers hot days in Iowa when he was here. I'm sure he does.
Oh, he does, because 1934 is about the hottest summer we ever had, at least for a period of prolonged heat. That was the year when everybody in Des Moines, it seemed, slept on the State House lawn. We didn't have any air conditioning then, and he was here in 1934. See, he was here in Des Moines from 33 to 37 as a sportscaster for WHO.
And by the way, this is News Center 13 live coverage of the president's visit to the D Brothers farm near State Center.
You notice that old Father D is right in with them, and he's the one talking to Dutch, as he calls him, because he used to listen to him. He was a loyal baseball fan of Dutch's when Dutch was telecasting or broadcasting over WHO radio, Chicago Cub games, and also University of Iowa football.
Now, you have been up to the farm, so of course we just, visually in the background, we saw the family farmstead, and we are headed down now towards
well, I think
family members.
Yes, it looks to me like that's Nellie.
Nellie in the middle.
Nellie is the mother of the boys. He's shaking hands with Nellie now. She is a Marshalltown native, as I remember it. Anyway, she went to Marshalltown High School, and she is a nurse. She used to be a nurse in the old Deaconess Hospital in Marshalltown. Now, I think the Marshalltown Community Hospital. She's a very lovely woman. And the boy, I don't know whose boy that is. The son of one or the other of them. It's a family operation because we found Shirley, who is Alan's wife, out walking the beans when we were up there. Everybody contributes.
I think everybody walks beans this time of year if you have a farm.
There's a good shot of Mrs. Don D on the right. And let's see, and that's Shirley in between, I believe. Now they're lining up the picture.
It looks like a family picture, doesn't it?
Certainly
Summer's
is.
family picture on the D farm.
How many times we've all done that? That's a picture that will be treasured for the next 100 years by all descendants of the D family.
And then so they can kind of turn and I must explain just for folks who may not necessarily be familiar, in the business we call it a photo op or photo opportunity, and the president must be so accustomed to his photo ops that several different stops along the way.
He's a very amiable guy, and I think he really genuinely enjoys such occasions as this.
But they're always planned in addition to his talking with people, the chance to...
I wonder what he picked up.
By the way, there are camera cables strung all over the D family farm to be able to... There we see some of their props in the background.
Yeah. Also, you know, they had to be careful that he didn't, or somebody famous didn't fall into a silage pit.
Oh, goodness.
They made arrangements and guarded against every conceivable possible mishap. I don't know where they're going now.
Yes.
Maybe to go get some ice cream.
It looks like... you see some animals here shortly.
I hope they bring out that big boar.
Their family pet.
Yep.
At 11 o'clock this morning, you were speaking to Stacy.
There he
is.
I'll bet that's the one. I bet that's the 800
It looks like 800 a pound aboard of meat.
I expressed hope when I was up there that they'd show him.
I see a hay rack there in the background. I couldn't look quickly enough to see if there were bales of hay on that.
You notice the boar is more interested in something to eat than the president, and that's because they have him on a diet of 3 pounds of food a day, so he doesn't become 1,500 pounds. And now the president is petting him. He's a very docile animal, incidentally.
Well, there's a lot.
Look at that.
There's a lot of weight, I think, to handle there.
Mm-hmm. They had him all set. They usually keep him in the barrowing.
And I imagine he's been curried and groomed quite a bit.
Yes. They take good care of their animals.
I was just going to say about safety. At 11 o'clock this morning, they had sealed off the Bee family farm, as is the custom frequently when the president goes to a place that's out of perhaps his normal sort of routine. And they do what's called a sweep of the farm so that there would not be any explosive devices or anything of an unsafe nature.
Boy, they poke around every place.
They do look at everything. I know when presidents have visited buildings, sometimes the building owners have been asked to provide blueprints so they can even see where the heating and air conditioning ducts are.
No question about it. I don't know. I guess maybe they're pointing to their fields. I think maybe they have, as I remember it, they have about 400 acres of corn, and they've got a marvelous corn crop this year. They expect 200 bushels to the acre throughout that area. And I said, how do you manage that? They said, because we planted early and we worked around the clock and got our crop in so they didn't get caught by the weather.
That wet, soggy
That's right.
May that we had. And I understand they have 100 acres of beans. 100
acres of beans, that's right. I think maybe they're going over to the machine shed, which has been made into a, shall we say, entertainment spot, a lounge. If there could be such a thing as a lounge.
There are many Iowa farms that are very well kept, so I don't mean this as a reflection on theirs, but it's very nice, and I'm sure they got all the older machinery out of the way and what have you.
There's the
They're the
press.
folks who are bringing you the story.
That's right. That represents a cross-section of the American television services, and also quite a few newspaper reporters also.
I've been just mentally timing his visit. So far, he's only been there about 10 minutes, but he's covered quite a great distance of a farm in 10 minutes.
Well, he isn't going to be there very long, see, so he has to pack in a lot. See, the family is coming, traipsing after these people.
I think this may be one of the first times that I've seen Secret Service people shed their jackets.
Doesn't happen too often. I imagine the elder, you see him right here? The elder,
yes.
Mr. D. He's 71 years old, and his brother, Clarence, 67, now a veterinarian in Florida, was a guard, I think, for the University of Iowa in 1933, at which time Reagan was broadcasting Iowa football games, and his pay was $5 a game. No, wait a minute. By that time, he's gotten more, but he started out at $5 a game plus bus fare.
You've chatted with the D's. What are some of their political feelings about?
They're for Reagan. They voted for him, and they're happy with him, but they are interested in a long-term agreement if possible. I don't think that I'd be interested to hear what they're telling him. And also to listen in on the 40 farmers. The D's, you know, have something like 3,000 bales of straw here. And they were going to haul out a bunch of that straw and let the farmers all sit on that. But the Secret Service, for some reason or other, said no soap. And so they had to, as I understand it, they're going to interview the president while seated on picnic benches.
Eric apparently spent 3 hours stacking those straw bales. That's why I was looking at the hay rack in the background in an earlier picture thinking, gee, well, the hay rack is empty. Perhaps they used the bale somewhere.
I wonder why they ruled out the straw bales. What's dangerous about sitting on a bale of straw?
Maybe getting bug bites. That would be yeah. I can hear the sound of hogs in the background, so
I remember one time Adlai Stevenson, we asked him down in southern Iowa when he was campaigning for president. He sat on the grass with a bunch of farmers. What the result of his conference was, and he scratched himself in the back and said, I got 2 chigger bites on my rear. Now here's the hogs, and these D's are great hog farmers. There's no question about it. And anybody who turns out 2,500 hogs a year has to know what he's doing.
How do the D brothers, though, feel about the recession? Do they feel
Well,
the effect of them?
Oh yes, very definitely. They put it this way: they're making good money this year, but it'll be a while before they get caught up for what they lost in the preceding years. See, the hog prices are good, and the price of corn, the value of corn is low, so that the hog corn ratio is corn-hog ratio is very favorable right now. But as they told me, they said their goal this year is to pay income taxes. They haven't paid any income tax because they've been on a losing operation.
I haven't checked the price of corn today, but I know that it's, we'll say roughly $2.20 just for
something like that.
And an Iowa State economist estimates that Iowa farmers have to make at least $2.89 to break even.
Yeah, on production.
And so it could be that for them, the cheap price of corn, you might as well go to hogs, but still, it reflects.
Yeah, well, they told me that they thought they lost as much as $40 a hog in the past, but that they're making maybe $20 now. But that's on the hogs they feed out. That isn't what they might get from their breeding stock sales. And they apparently have customers, a widespread number of regular customers. At least they told me they did.
Judge, you've been a veteran political observer. What kind of benefits can Reagan expect to reap from this sort of a farm?
It's just appearances. He's a very cheerful guy, and he's very interested in people, and he's interested in what people are doing, and it's sort of like advertising. It's exposure. And, of course, he isn't running for anything, but he very much wants Cooper Evans reelected, and Cooper is in a tough fight with Lynn Cutler in the 3rd District. And Lynn Cutler gave him a good battle last time, and the district has been changed, and really, I don't think to Cooper's advantage at all. Now, what are they doing? They're starting to sit down.
They're having their lemonade on the picnic tables. We will try and listen in here for just a moment. We see Secretary Block flanking.
Eric.
And Eric.
Yeah. Now, see, Block on his Illinois farm produces about as many hogs as the D's do on this farm.
No problem with the color,
I wonder if we're talking about the weather. Don't most farmers talk about the weather? I'm sure that he feels like that lemonade is a welcome.
The elder Mrs. B just gave him a dish of ice cream. She told me that was being planned, but it was out of her jurisdiction. I would have thought that she arranged the refreshments, but that wasn't the case. And she wasn't put out because she's kind of a very nice person.
Let me just remind you, if you have just joined us, this is News Center 13's live coverage of President Ronald Reagan's visit here to Iowa. And right now, his visit to the D Brothers farm near State Center. I'm T.J. Beer with George Mill, our political observer. And we were just talking about the benefits that Reagan might reap, and I guess you'd say there would be he's making political hay while the sun shines.
Well, actually, his speech really didn't add a whole lot to the discussion. He said, I think, only really one new thing, maybe there's two. One new thing, which is that he had authorized Secretary Block to negotiate with the Russians beyond the terms of a one-year agreement. In other words, he's hoping that to maybe not have a longer-term agreement technically, but from a standpoint of actuality, to reap the same benefits.
But he is saying that he's watching what's happening in Poland.
Yes, he is.
And just by way of explaining, that's one reason why there are sanctions, because of the martial law. And he's indicating that if martial law relaxes a little bit, that may contribute to it.
Well, after all, the Russians, and I was in Russia at the time he was here in February, and we talked to the Russians about grain sales, and they were very obdurate. They were defiant, and they said, in effect, if you do clamp down on us and we don't get grain anymore, we'll get along. It won't be quite as comfortable, but we'll get along. They, in effect, were saying, don't push us around.
Sergeant Jepson even took off his tie. I think I would do it if it weren't that hot.
I don't see where Jepson's sitting.
We just saw him a moment ago.
Yeah. And Grassley's there somewhere. And interestingly enough, I don't know whether the Democratic congressman went up there or not, Harkin and Fidel.
We'll try and listen in again to see if we can catch what the farmers are saying.
Good. So, you're surrounded by press.
President, you just talked about sending the export of grain to Russia, but nothing here. Maybe you've heard there's a few surplus dairy products. How about selling all the dairy products to Russia, too?
Going into the food room, We have been trying and working with the dairy products.
What do you want me to get? This is kind of free. Can you read it?
There are a number of ways we have been certain rules, regulations, law that prevent us.
You got it.
Even though the government has to store them and to buy them, keep the government from going out into competition with the market, because then you just increase the problem by the surplus in the first place. So we have to be very selective as to how we do it. One of the best ways has been not otherwise happen. Jack, maybe you know more about it than I do. I don't believe that we could just go out as the export market itself. We run into the problem that we take them and put them right into the market because it disrupts the whole market. These dairy products have to be sold below the cost of the government because world prices are below the prices of days we get on the side. It would be short disrupting the world market. Putting it into all kinds of things. Doing the very thing. Just trying to cut the legs out from
As you might have guessed, the Iowa wind is playing havoc with microphones. But we are watching John Block explain to a farmer who asked about why don't we sell all our dairy products to Russia. And what I could understand from that, he was saying that we would have to sell it below the government's cost. So that would make it would cost the government even more to do that. It might get the surpluses off the government's back. But
You know, it's pretty interesting when you look at how our world, our globe has shrunk. The president said today that the production of 2 out of every 5 acres of Iowa, of American farmland goes into export. In other words, goes to other countries. And we, in turn, are taking a tremendous amount of the production of other countries, and we're using them. It's sort of, isn't it the brotherhood of man coming into being? We're so interdependent upon each other that it's just like we're all getting closer and closer and closer, and we obviously have to cooperate as in the sort of a spirit of brotherhood to survive.
that helps explain why farmers, in many sense, keep their eye on world grain trading almost more than what's happening in the United States. I mean, it's such an integral part of their existence. Who would have guessed that in a matter of a couple of decades that farmers would be watching what was happening in Brazil just as much as they were watching what's happening in the United States?
Local story.
And by the way, here is Iowa Secretary of Agriculture, Lounsbury.
Yeah. And it was at his farm in 1980 that Dutch Reagan made a major farm policy speech. Remember that? You were there.
Indeed. In addition to his farm policy speech, he also flipped a mighty good passel of pancakes.
That was a fun trip, too.
Of course, at that time, he also talked about grain embargoes.
That's right. Well, of course.
And eliminating them.
That's right. And they're still taking full credit for that. The president did again today. The fact that he kept his campaign promise by eliminating the grain embargo that was put into effect by President Carter for the purpose of chastising the Russians for the Afghanistan caper, which, of course, is even more of a imposition, a suppression, a military suppression.
This administration is not going to interfere with the we have a gas taxes. There was no multi in this. That stays in place. It is in place. It can economically be produced. The free enterprise system will see it happen. That's the way it should be.
Thank you, John. Just to follow up on it, Mr. President, you know, rationale it takes more energy to produce a gallon of alcohol than it can get out of it. Certainly would apply also to diesel fuel and every other refined fuel if you were to judge it on that basis. So, I mean, that's, we often hear that as a criticism to the ethanol industry. But I think it should also be remembered that the price...
This is News Center 13, live coverage of President Ronald Reagan's visit to Iowa. We are at the D. Brothers Farm. Actually, I'm not personally at the D. Brothers Farm, but the pictures you are seeing are from the D. Brothers Farm near State Center. I'm P.J. Beer, with me is George Mills. We had hoped to hear what the farmers were asking of the president. We have some problems here. One is the nature of the Iowa countryside, which is wind, and also we have heard it reported that there were microphones at this location, but they were removed for what reason we do not know. Apparently the White House staff requested that. So that is one reason why we're having some difficulty hearing the president's conversation with farmers.
They just don't want us to eavesdrop on the president. Incidentally, I haven't seen him pop any corn candy in his mouth.
Now, he was given some by 4-Hers, wasn't that?
Well, I don't know who it was up there at the auditorium. They didn't give him jelly beans, and they gave him some corn candy. Now, whether he took it away with him or not, I don't know, but...
If he has a sweet tooth, I wager that he had a little nibble.
Mm-hmm. I wonder what that is.
Well, he's talking about interest rates.
Yeah, or else it's a graph of some sort.
And with it also with the...
I'm surprised that they haven't, any place, so far as I've heard, claim a little credit for the downturn from 16.5 to 15 in the prime rate. I thought they would be starting to swell up their chests on that one, but they haven't.
When they tried to move down from that peak, they down way below even their own path that they have, that the tracks that they have with the money supply to travel on to keep up with the economy. And for the first 6 or 7 months we were there, the money supply was way down here.
He's talking about the money supply and how it's way down.
Oh, I thought you were talking about farm income.
There he's taking a little bit of the credit for downturn. He's saying, well, interest rates are down to 15% now.
You must be a finger reader, DJ, because I don't think if you're a lip reader that you could see him. But he's certainly gesturing enough.
I guess I just have good ears from being the mother of a new infant. You tune those ears up. I never knew they had those capabilities.
I wonder if the other reporters and camera people at the scene, including our Christie, are close enough so they can hear and can tell us later what this is, because it seems to be a pretty serious discussion.
George, can you comment on politicians and their acts, or what kind of access they give to other people? President Reagan seems to like small, chatty groups where there is no official comment afterwards. I hesitate to use the word secret, but sort of an off-the-record...
Without attribution, they call it.
Right.
You can write the story, but don't say that I told you. That's what it amounts to.
And I don't mean to suggest that this is of a similar nature, but he frequently has groups with a small group when he comes to a community, and nobody else is invited.
That's right. I think, why don't you think anybody likes that format of a small group where there can be quite a little give and take, but not a great big bunch of people where the thing will get off out of bounds pretty quickly.
Are there any political liabilities to having that sort of small
there can be, because if some people don't get in on the group, their noses might get out of joint. Richard Nixon used to do that. In the years between the time he lost the governorship of California and he was nominated in 1968, he'd come into town and he'd call up and say, hey, I'm down at the Savory. Some of you guys want to come down and talk to me. And we'd go down there, 4 or 5 reporters, and talk to him for a couple of hours and get his latest ideas. And I think at the same time he was around talking to politicians, taking advantage of those trips and getting brownie points, so that by the time 1968 arrived, well, he was in pretty good shape and he got the nomination.
By testing out some of the ideas.
That's right. That's right.
Let's also identify the players on the screen. To the left is one of the D brothers.
I think that's Eric, I'm pretty sure.
And then Secretary of Agriculture John Block, and then, of course, the President.
That's right. Now it's from the other angle.
Yeah.
The other way around.
And we will see Alan to his right.
Yeah. No, I think that's Eric, isn't it? I don't know. They're, I don't know how far apart they are in age, but they're both about the same size, big husky fellows, and obviously hard-working. Wait a minute, now that...
I think that is Alan.
Yeah, that's right, and this is Eric over here. I point at, to the left.
We'll give it a try to listen in on their conversation once more, because they all seem quite involved.
I know I've been talking too long on this question. There's others that want to ask, but I just have to tell you one thing. When I told you that I understood some of your problems, I got a Ford tractor that I bought second-hand way back in the 50s. It was a 1953 tractor. And I bought it for $1,200. And it serves the purpose for the kind of farming I'm doing, except that now on the ranch we have, there are a lot of rocks I'd like to move. And every once in a while I'm home that I don't have a skip load truck. So Nancy happened to be the center partner one night of a gentleman who's an official with the tractor company. She was telling him about this. Well, he said, that's ridiculous. You ought to have this kind of tractor. And he said, what? He said, I'm going to send a man up and he'll make a good deal on the little tractor. Don't you worry. And the man came up and he did. You know, more than 25 years ago. I spent $1,200 for that tractor. He's willing to give me $4,000 on it, trade. Then all I got to do is give him $13,000 more. I can have a new tractor. Still using the old tractor. I'm the head of it. I was wondering if you want to get more important reserve. But now, we was getting far enough. We kind of screwed up there. I wonder if there couldn't be something done on that. Let me help you with that one. First place, you don't own the land that you're on, right? No, I didn't know. You can't get money. You know, great story going. What is carrying
about the set-aside program.
Incidentally, the Greens are not in the program. No, they signed up for it.
Go ahead.
Okay, talk to the owner.
Okay.
Well, you might. It does happen. You know, the very fine facilities and practices these are made here in this operation. I'm a fortunate myself and operate similar practices like this in facilities. What is your thoughts be in regards to legislation that would restrict this type of facilities and operations like this, such as the animal welfare that we are seeing in existence now?
Well, now, Conroy, when we were seeing this, you mentioned something about that, and I guess it didn't register on me that this was maybe a subject of a problem. I knew at the time when you said it that it sounded strange. I couldn't remember being a problem for farmers. What is this? Is this new regulations and so forth that are now?
I don't think there's any regulations as such, but there is interest for legislation to be adapted sometimes to use. We're just trying to go off those types of things that might happen. That's what we do to these days. We think we're treating the livestock with a very good humane, giving all of the comforts and everything, and it's really people that think that they need a more natural habitat to get them more natural. One of my concerns as a producer, not only as a pork producer, but as field and poultry and other types of operations that have inflammatory programs.
You mean those kind of rugged, funny people that would be happier running around in the field?
I just say that I'm convinced, I know the president, this is really a big issue. It's a huge issue. We've really been talking about it, but I just don't see it that way. For producers to make money raising livestock, the livestock must be healthy, they must be well cared for, they must be kept, they need to be happy, or they're not going to be. And after all, that's all you can ask. It's not a humane treatment. The good producers all have to do that anyway. It's part of the economics of raising livestock. So in the long run, I just don't see this as a big issue. I know that there may be cases somewhere where animals aren't treated properly. There are. We all know that. But none of us know that. But I think having heavy government regulations or restrictions is not appropriate.
I've just done that.
Economics make us do a good job. I want you to know this. Just one thing. The reason I asked about regulations, we set up a task force. George Bush and I came with one promise to government, among others, and one was to start getting rid of the regulations that were imposing upon us.
This is News Center 13's live coverage of President Ronald Reagan's visit to Iowa, and we apologize for the audio difficulties. A combination of the ever-present Iowa wind, as you see the corn tasseled out in the background waving in the wind, and the fact that reportedly the microphones that had been placed near the president and in the midst of those 40 farmers on the D Brothers Farm near State Center had been removed. I'm talking with George Mills, our veteran political correspondent, about a lot of things, including some of the grain and livestock problems that farmers are facing and the kinds of things that the farmers are expressing to President Ronald Reagan. Of course, the president earlier this afternoon gave a speech before the Iowa Corn Growers Association and the National Corn Growers, I should say, and was well received. Was very happy. Looks like they might be signing off, as it were, which is in fact what we will be doing if we had some better audio quality, I think we might stay and eavesdrop on the conversation. But as it turns out, we will be winding up our coverage here shortly.
You know, one interesting thing that we haven't touched on, and that is they talk about million metric tons all the time. Do you know what a metric ton is?
Why don't you tell me what a metric ton is, George?
Well, it's about 2,200 pounds. It's about 10% larger. And I was just figuring here, we produce in Iowa, or last year, we produced between 40 and 45 million metric tons of corn. And in the United States, around 200 million, over 200 million.
And they're
metric
talking
tons.
about an export figure of 6 to 8.
Yeah, which
right
really doesn't sound amount to anything at all. And this doesn't count the wheat crop. And the Russians get about 170 million tons a year, and they need, I mean, in the last 3 or 4 years, and they need around 220. So they're way short, you see. So they really ought to be a great market for us if they've got the money. But you notice the president said they've got to put cash on the barrelhead to get it.
I would like to thank all my colleagues who have been with me today covering President Ronald Reagan's visit to Iowa. George Mills is with me right now, anchor Mike Keene and Christy Callahan, who served us ably in our live remote areas. And I am T.J. Beer. We'd like to thank you for joining us. Of course, we will have full reports tonight at 6 and 10. We have reporters who will be bringing you news of what the conversation is that we didn't get to eavesdrop on this time, and also a report of the reaction of the president's visit to Iowa. Thank you for joining us.